Hey there everyone, it is I, the Doge that digs through the internet for the best of the worst of D&D. In today's episode of Dungeons & Dragons Horror Stories, we have a story about two players that make, but ultimately break a campaign. Then we have a story about a player in the Westmarches server that is a blight on everyone there. And finally, a tale of a DM that runs a player's worst game that they ever experienced. But first, as is tradition at this point, let's get some bardic inspiration to protect from the psychic damage that these stories are sure to inflict. Thanks, Lucky. And now that we are prepared, let's get right into these stories. When the Two Most Fun Players Ruin a Game, by Reddit user HalloHerNoob. Prologue. This is a short story about one of the most fun, and at the same time, disappointing games I have ever played. The RPG was Pathfinder, 1st edition, not really important for the story, and we were 6 players, mostly friends of the DM. Some of us knew each other already, but most did not. Session 1. Session 1 was insanely fun, honestly one of the best times I ever had with an RPG. While the story did not sound too exciting, as Modius and Abadar, basically two lawful deities arguing over a technicality in a contract with potentially far-reaching consequences, it was really well told, at least the bit that we could experience in one session, and ended with a pretty huge cliffhanger. The biggest reason why the session was great though, were two of the players. Let's call them A and B. They both had similar personalities, very sarcastic and witty, and they had a lot of fun teasing each other both in and out of the game. Apparently, they had just met for the first time. It was all in good spirits though, and both of them could dish out as well as they could take, resulting in a lot of fun back and forth banter. In game, their characters tried to constantly outwit each other, but never at the expense of the group as a whole, and when things got tough, they would always pull through. So, we all left in pretty high spirits, looking very much forward to the next session. However, as the date came closer, our DM seemed to be strangely hesitant, delaying the session and clearly making excuses for postponing from one date to the next, without giving a clear reason why. Still, with everyone else, or so I thought, looking forward to it, he couldn't really say no, and ultimately the second session took place. Session 2. Disaster Strikes. Pretty much as soon as it started, it became clear why our DM had been so hesitant. A and B were clearly hating each other for, at the time, unclear reasons. Where they would have fun with the back and forth teasing that was going on before, they now mostly say incredibly personal, passive-aggressive insults, leaving the rest of the table in awkward silence while both of them got more and more angry at each other. Instead of rolling with the punches or laughing at themselves when the other one said something clever, they reacted touchy and petty to anything, attacking other players for agreeing to anything that their rival said. And where before they would cooperate in character if necessary, they were now clearly undermining the entire group as long as the other person would suffer too, refusing to heal each other, making strange excuses why they couldn't come to the other one's support. Example: I try to help you, but stumble on my way. All the while, pretending like everything was just normal. The entire situation was incredibly awkward for the rest of the group. It kind of felt like being invited to a dinner with a couple, and then hearing them fight constantly about private and personal stuff, while trying to convince you, as a total outsider, to take their side, if that comparison makes any sense. They clearly did not pull any punches either, making jokes about the other's family, sexual experience, weight, but playing it off as fun teasing when being called out on it. Our DM, bless his soul, did all that he could, at one point even forcefully splitting up the party to separate them, but it was all for naught. Even with both of them at different parts of the city, they would call out each other's roles or decisions constantly, and, for some reason, seemed to do everything in their power to get back together just so they could start fighting again. The night ended when one of the other players very obviously faked an emergency back home to get out of the situation, to the unspoken relief of everyone else at the table. The aftermath. The DM explained to me later what happened. Apparently, because A and B got along so well, they continued talking after our first session. Here's where both of their stories differ, but in general, both assured the DM that the other person had insulted them, and they started fighting because of it. My suspicion is that one of them just went a bit too far with their teasing, though it's impossible to say who, and it spiraled out of control from there. The problem was that A, the DM was friends with both of them. B, it was impossible to tell who was at fault, with both of them pointing the finger at the other one. And C, they had assured the DM that they wanted to continue the game, and had asked him not to tell us what happened, because it would spoil the mood. We talked about how to proceed afterwards, but all the options were bad. Kicking one of them from the group would inevitably mean losing him or her as a friend, while kicking out both of them would mean losing 2 important characters, and potentially 2 friends. And since the second session left such a bad taste in our mouths, we decided to just cancel the game, unable to really restart it or start a new one. Man, that is a shame to hear. It sounded like the whole dynamic between everyone at the table was really fun and entertaining. And for all of that to come crashing down because one person feels slighted by the other is a real shame. Perhaps, if those 2 players could just talk it out and figure out that it was just a misunderstanding, then the game could continue. Though, that would mean one of them admitting that they were wrong, and from my experience, not many people in this world have that ability. Hopefully they can though, and this fun campaign can lift off once again. Let's move on. Stalker in Matt Colville's Westmarches server, by Reddit user Micah Hammy. This was a few years ago. I was a DM/admin for a Discord Westmarches server that Matt Colville used to advertise in the lower half of his video descriptions. I DM'd for this woman, I'll call her Ash, in the UK, and 3 of her friends and a random that joined last second. I'll call him Germ, as we could fit 5 players. Germ wanted to see how the game was going to work, so they joined 20 minutes early, and we talked in the voice channel for a bit. The other players came in, and we got started. Germ went silent as soon as everyone came in. I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. He seemed young, so maybe he didn't feel comfortable talking to women yet. So I made all the tokens, while Ash and her friends talked for a bit, and when I asked for everyone to introduce themselves while I put things together, Germ typed that their mic wasn't working. I felt bad for him a bit. We've all been there, choked up when girls are around. We get to the end of the game after the players fight off a bunch of gnolls and undead. A little bit of bragging, but it was one of my finest games I've ever DM'd. Germ finally pipes up and says, "That was a great game, Ash. Thank you for inviting me." I thought that it was weird since Germ invited himself, but I smile and think, oh good, finally breaking the ice. But then, Ash just starts screaming for Germ to go fuck themselves and die. I mute everyone for a moment, and then pull Ash into a room and ask what was going on. Why is she acting like that to some poor kid? She then tells me that as an admin I should know, but I explained that I didn't since I was so new, and asked for her to explain. It turns out that this guy Germ has been harassing her for months in this server. So I looked back in the logs we kept on a Google Doc, and it's all of the incidents and bans in the history of the server, and I find about 3 to 4 dozen reports of the same guy finding a way around the ban to get back into the server. He worms their way into every game she's in and tries to DM his creepy fetishized fanfic of what they did in that session. I insta-banned Germ's account after seeing his newest DM. The line that will always stick with me is, "And her sweaty feet squished the gnoll's head like a rotten watermelon." I talk to Ash again for a bit, and I tell her that I will find a way to keep them from getting back into the server. We close down the server for a bit and re-interview everyone on the server. We have them talk to us for a few minutes to see if it's the same guy or not. We ended up getting rid of 3 or 4 accounts that are suspected to be clones of germs. We open the server back up and make audio interviews mandatory to join the server. All of this headache because this guy can't not be a creep. TLDR, creep stalks girl and writes bad fanfic. How does someone get to that point of obsession where they make multiple sock puppet accounts, all to cyberstalk some poor girl? It's crazy that they had to go to the lengths of doing audio interviews for every new player just to avoid this creep from coming back into the server. Hopefully, this is a decent enough boundary to prevent Germ from getting back in. Though, unfortunately, crazy always finds a way. But you know what isn't crazy? Liking and commenting on the video, and subscribing if you haven't already, or using your cash to achieve that goal. Right, Nipsey?
Yes, like, comment and subscribe. I really like this platform.
He really likes stuff. Anyway, let's move on to the final story of the day. Stop Pissing Everywhere by Reddit user Super Sword Gaming. I've made a couple of posts here, but I'm always trying new games, and I saw an ad for a game on Discord, and I thought it sounded like fun. Boy, was I wrong. So, to start, we sat down with the other players and had a proper session 0, where we asked the questions we thought were relevant, and the DM told us some things that he thought were relevant. It seemed fine, except he said, "I'm a world builder first and a DM second." This phrase bugged me, and I didn't know why. I figured it was probably just him saying that, "I make the world, what you do in it is up to you." And that made sense, so I made a character, a level 4 Druid Centaur with the body of a deer. I was excited. The game rolls up, and we start, but there's no word of how I'm going to be introduced or when, so I wait, and wait, and wait. Meanwhile, the players are pissing around, literally. One of them was pissing around on the street, trying to get NPCs to do the same, and even pissed in some room full of wizards that were supposedly all-powerful. The party was given a job to do: stop this dragon lord by collecting 30 statues that could be turned into full dragons, if they were left to the dragon lord, lest the world fall into ruin. This might sound like it could be a fun story, but I was told that the game was going to be lighter and more fun rather than serious, so my character was designed to reflect that. This was a bummer, but I could work around it. But the pissing was bothering me, as I felt like I'd walked in on someone's fetish. Eventually, after an hour and a half, us new players were being introduced. The first player was introduced as a Goliath. The DM said that the door of the tavern slams open from the sheer strength of the Goliath. The player kind of quietly said, "Oh, well, I wouldn't slam it. I'd be very aware of my strength and carefully open it." And this seemed to bother the DM, but he let it go. I was preparing to get introduced too. Was I going to go into the tavern? I was fresh from the Feywilds, and yes, it would make sense that I'd go to the local watering hole out of curiosity. But no, I don't seem to show up. Okay, that's fine. Oh, they're leaving. I bet they'll bump into me in the street. I'll fall down on my deer butt and say what a klutz I am and apologize and... Oh, that didn't happen either. Well, now I'm confused and bored. Finally, the party hears what sounds like a horn, as the forest nearby apparently was so dangerous that almost nobody ever comes out of it once they go in. And out I walk. NPCs saying that this was my second time doing so. Massive improv DM mode activates, and I decided to go with it. I'm so directionally challenged that I got lost. Twice. The party joins up, and I have a bit ready where I say that I'll lead them and go the completely wrong way, before being pointed in the right direction. But the DM says that I turn around and lead them in. Oh, so it's like that. By this point, I'm starting to get irritated and feel really weird vibes. The wizards had given a +3 axe to one of the players, and after the players demanded gifts as well, the all-powerful wizards gave them what they asked for. One player had refused to go into a shop, thus stopping the game for nearly 45 minutes, while the DM offered alternatives, and the player was simply unwilling to do anything because of an in-lore reason for not wanting his NPC cannon fodder homeless people in the store. But now, after an hour and a half, we were on the move. I get a bit in, recounting some of the things that a lowly level 4 like me had seen, according to the DM. You know, giant spiders, Yanti, murderers of crows, wormlings, other centaurs, and more. And suddenly, I get hit for 5 HP by some mind-controlled crow. I go to get ready for combat, and another player attacks with some sort of magic item, dealing 70 damage. And he said that he could reload as a bonus action to make another attack in the same turn. But the bird just exploded, making investigating it impossible. I was blown away by this number. I even asked, how did he do 70 damage at level 4? And that's when it came up. He wasn't level 4. He was level 6, with deliberately overpowered magic items, because he had been there so long, and it was a reward for staying so long. I was underleveled compared to him, and with no magic items. Apparently, I wasn't alone in my weird feelings, and another player, the Goliath, chimed in, saying that he wasn't comfortable in this game, and said his goodbyes. He went to leave, and the DM started defending everything, and putting the blame on the player for not asking questions during session 0. He completely dismissed the player's feelings and concerns, even when I chimed in, saying that I thought it felt off as well. It took nearly a half an hour of the DM defending himself, using the phrase of, "I'm a world builder first and a DM second," to my disgust, and justifying the others having magic items and being a higher level, that eventually the Goliath just left. The session fizzled out, and I left the same game, albeit privately in a call. I have never seen so many problems in one session. The DM then went on to blame the other player for the problem, and wasting time, even to me. The Goliath and I are hanging out now, and he's a backup character in the game that I DM. TLDR, players go around pissing on everything, are higher level than us new players, and have crazy strong magic items. Then the DM blames the players by getting blindsided by the direction we weren't informed about and playing favorites to his old players. Yeah, it definitely sounds like that game was a bit of a cluster and a half. Plus, Goliath posted his version of the story in the comments of the post as well, so let's go check that out. Hey, the Goliath here. I can confirm that I got very weird vibes from the DM and the 2 players that were previously in the campaign, the Incontinent Barbarian and the 70 damage Finger Darts Man, during the lengthy phase where our characters were not introduced, such as the Finger Darts player mimicking in the Discord call the middle finger he was apparently able to throw up prior to being paralyzed by the wizards, holding it up for a solid 5 to 10 minutes. I also got a little irked when the Warforged fighter, who had named themselves after Jetstream Sam, and I believe maybe Yasuo from League of Legends, was introduced by the DM during the wizard intermission by us being told that he had killed 20 adult dragons when the wizards had fought against the dragon god. Most importantly, however, I had noticed that the DM would give in to their demands very easily. Of course he can't just tell them, "No, you can't do that," but I still got an uneasy feeling when the barbarian was allowed to derail the simple shopping trip by refusing to go in there, and when the 2 of them repeatedly made outlandish demands from the wizards, such as the barbarian requesting an army of Orogs and a war chariot, and they said yes. At first, they threatened to wipe the brains of the characters if they didn't cooperate. Then they gave them an army when they didn't cooperate. I had also gone into great lengths to make my character fit the DM's admittedly interesting world and lore, which made it all the more frustrating when he blatantly ignored my character's most fundamental aspects. I was playing a Way of Mercy monk who used ancient Chinese culinary medicine and fought with dual-wielding wooden clubs, if people want to know. It sounded like that DM was one of the railroady variety, especially with that phrase, "I'm a world builder first, DM second." OP had some great ideas to introduce his character, but it seemed like the DM already had it set in his head on how that would happen, even when it came to OP roleplaying. Then there was the issue with the power differential between players. Now, I can understand newer players being a little bit behind on level, but should eventually be around the same so no one feels left behind. But this DM was obviously playing favorites when it came to his most loyal subjects. At least it sounds like OP made a new gaming buddy out of the whole ordeal. Do you have a story that you would like to be shared on the channel? If so, feel free to post a link in the comments, on the d&Ddoge subreddit, or even just at me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you, and hope all of your rolls are natural 20s. Until next time.